She walked barefoot, the cracked earth kicking up clouds around her ankles, like ghosts trying to cling to her. Every step was a whisper of something broken, something bruised. The village of San Miro didn't need to say her name to curse her, they'd already carved it into stone with silence. Her dress, soaked with sweat and humiliation, stuck to her legs like regret. Her tangled hair, stiff from days of dust and no water, framed a face the townsfolk no longer looked at least not without judgment. Marisol pressed on toward the small clay chapel that squatted at the village's heart. As the morning bell announced Mass, its sound fell like judgment rather than invitation. It was Sunday, a day of rituals and reverence. Families arrived in pressed linen and muttered sacred verses, as if whispering them kept the dirtier truths away. But when Marisol stepped onto the sun-baked stone steps of the chapel, it was like she had thrown a stone into still water. Ripples of whispered disgust spread instantly. "That's her, right?" someone hissed. "She's cursed. She shouldn't be here." Mothers clutched their children close like shields, and men pulled the brims of their hats low not to show respect, but to hide their sneers. Then the priest emerged, his robe a heavy shimmer of gold thread, as though God himself had stitched it in rage. His voice boomed like thunder dressed in righteousness. "You may not come in," he declared, loud enough for the angels to hear. "This is a sacred place. It will not be tainted by a woman soaked in sin. There is no welcome here for your kind." Marisol froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The faces in front of her, people she'd grown up with, turned away, not with pity, but loathing. Then, with all the drama of a final judgment, the priest slammed the chapel doors shut. She didn't cry, not yet. She turned, slowly, and began walking across the plaza, leaving behind the holy echo of rejection. Dust followed her like a shadow as she made her way toward the edge of town, where an old dry riverbed cut into the hills. Under a warped mesquite tree, she knelt by the thinnest trickle of water and began scrubbing the road shame off her feet that had carried her through more cruelty than most could bear. Then she saw him, or thought she did. A man, or the shape of one, stood nearby. He looked ancient, his beard falling to his chest like a sheet of snow, his cloak shredded by time. He held a carved wooden staff, and his eyes, they didn't belong to this era. They held stillness like they'd watched the rise and fall of empires. "May I sit, child?" he asked, his voice as soft as a lullaby soaked in reverence. She didn't reply with words, just nodded. He lowered himself beside her with the slow grace of someone who had broken in places not visible. From within his worn cloak, he produced a crust of bread, split it in half, and offered her a piece. "I have nothing to give you back," she murmured, voice thin. "It's not a trade," he said simply. "It's a share." She accepted the bread without meeting his eyes. There was something strange about him. He didn't look at her like she was rotten. He didn't seem afraid of her story. That, more than anything, hurt. "What's your name?" she asked, not expecting much. "Elias," he said. "Like the prophet, or maybe just an old fool who thinks he used to be one." She laughed, a dry, jagged sound that didn't carry joy. "So what are you now? Another madman wandering the desert in search of meaning?" He smiled, soft and knowing. "Maybe. Or maybe I used to be someone else before the temples forgot what mercy meant." The water beside them burbled faintly, a quiet song. She glanced down at her feet, still stained with blood and old road dust. "What did you see when you looked at me?" she asked. She didn't even know why she needed to ask. She just did. He took a long pause. Then, with reverence, he said, "I saw a woman broken by men who still found the will to walk. That's holier than any cathedral wall." Marisol turned away. Not because she was ashamed, but because she hadn't been seen like that in years, maybe ever. Behind them, the chapel bells stopped ringing, but something, buried deep inside her, began to stir. It wasn't hope, not yet, but the echo of it. The next morning, Marisol woke to the soft crunch of footsteps near the tree. She'd curled beneath the mesquite through the night, her shawl wrapped tight against the desert chill. When she blinked herself awake, Elias was already crouching by the water, his cupped hands collecting the stream's frail gift. "You sleep like someone bracing for pain," he said without turning. She scowled, rubbing her arms. "Habit." Elias ambled over, slow but steady, and sank down beside her again. In the sunlight, something caught her eye on his hand, a strange gleam. When he shifted his cloak, she saw it, a golden ring. Thick, ancient. It bore a carved seal across laid over 2 keys. Her breath caught. "That's a papal ring," she whispered. He glanced at it like it was just another scar. Yes, the real one, I think. It hasn't fit right in years, but I still carry it. Where did you get that? She asked sharply, suspicion flaring. I told you, he replied calmly. I used to be the Pope. She let out a harsh scoff. Not the one in silk and marble? No, he said, the one who got pushed out when he started kneeling before people like you. She almost laughed, but his voice anchored her. It didn't beg to be believed, but it dared her to doubt. So you expect me to believe Rome exiled you for washing sinners? Elias shrugged. Not just the poor, the shamed, the ones the altars won't welcome. They called it heresy, I called it the truth. She studied his face, worn, but not wild. His eyes held sorrow, not madness, and the ring, it was too sacred to be fake, too precise to be costume. Still, pride made her lash out. You think you just show up and save me? No, he said softly. I think maybe you'll save me. The weight of it hit her harder than she wanted to show. She turned away, brushing the confusion from her eyes. I don't need saving. I know, he answered. That's why you deserve it. They sat in silence, whined through brittle grass, the creek a hush at their feet. Finally, she asked the question that wouldn't let go. Why did you wash my feet? His voice was quiet, almost breaking. Because someone should have. Long ago. That evening, the sky turned molten gold, fading into violet streaks across the desert. Marisol sat close to the fire they'd built from splintered branches, arms wrapped around her knees. Elias sat across, hands folded like prayer, though no words were spoken. She hadn't planned to speak, but silence too long as a blade turned inward. You want to know what they say about me? She asked without looking up. Only if you want to tell me, he replied. She poked the fire with a stick, scattering sparks like old secrets. They say I killed my husband. Elias didn't even blink. They say I seduced a preacher, poisoned my own father, slept with devils. But the worst thing, the part they whisper like it's the gospel truth, is that I enjoyed it, that I liked being wicked. She laughed, a sound too dry to carry tears. You ever hear something that dumb in Rome? He nodded. Every day, just with fancier Latin. She dropped the stick, fists clenched. My husband, he was a hunter, drank like he had a vendetta against the sky. He used to lock me in the cellar when I talked wrong, said the dark made women holy. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. One night, he came home furious, said he lost his rifle gambling, thought I was mocking him. I wasn't, but that didn't matter. He dragged me by my hair to the cliff, told me I'd either fly or die. Her hands trembled. I didn't push him, not really. I twisted. He slipped. The rocks did the rest. Elias didn't flinch, didn't lean away, just listened. I buried him, said nothing, but they knew. They always know, when a woman lives through what she wasn't meant to. The fire snapped loudly, like it was agreeing. You think that makes me evil? She asked, staring into his eyes. No, he said. It makes you human and tired. She swallowed, voice thick. You don't even know me. I know pain when I see it, Elias said, and I know some wounds bleed without ever opening. Stars had scattered across the sky now, winking into life. And yours? She asked. Did they bleed? Elias looked upward. Mine bled in silence. The world had named it wisdom, but here, beside dying embers and a sky inching toward dawn, it felt more like surrender. They sat long into the night, bathed in the kind of stillness that doesn't demand explanations, only the ache of presence. Morning didn't break. It exhaled, gentle and slow, crawling over the hills like a secret trying not to be heard. The sun was barely a rumor in the sky when Marisol stirred, ears twitching at the sound of water. But this wasn't the tired trickle of the dried-up creek. It was deliberate scooping, pouring, the way one prepares something sacred. She opened her eyes and saw Elias, kneeling by the stream, cloak draped across a rock, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. Before him sat an old, dented metal basin, its surface trembling with clear water gathered stone by stone. Marisol blinked, sitting upright. What are you doing? Elias didn't glance her way. He kept pouring with a quiet devotion. Preparing a rite, he said softly, almost to himself. She furrowed her brow. A what now? He finally looked at her, solemn, kind, unshaken. A ritual, older than cathedrals, older than sin, one the church forgot how to perform with grace. He nodded toward a flat stone near the basin. Sit. She hesitated. Number. Why not? Because I'm not clean, she snapped. I've never been clean. He didn't flinch. He rose, slow as the tide, and stepped toward her, not to corner her, but as if approaching a wounded animal. They've called you filthy for so long you started saying it louder than they ever could. She shook her head, voice hard. This won't undo what I've done. No, he agreed, but it might remind you that you're not ruined. Something inside her, something she thought had frayed away years ago, finally snapped. With trembling legs, she rose and sank onto the stone. Elias knelt before her, his hands wrapped gently around her feet, dipping them into the water. The cold made her flinch, but his touch was steady and warm. He didn't recoil at the cracks, the dirt pressed deep in her skin, the scars. He didn't hurry. He washed her like it meant something. Her eyes burned as he dried them with the hem of his cloak. She bit her lip to stop the sob that tried to escape. Then, without a word, he kissed the top of each foot lightly, reverently, like returning something the world had stolen from her. I've never seen you cry, he said, not as a question, but a truth gently spoken. I forgot how, she whispered. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, spilling gold onto the basin, and up in the hills, someone else watched. A farm boy, carrying an empty pail for water, saw them and froze. His mouth dropped open, and before the wind could steal the scene, he turned and bolted back toward the village, bursting with the strangest story he'd ever witnessed. The woman the town had spat on, the old man they whispered about, and how he washed her feet like she was royalty. By noon, San Miro hummed like a hive just disturbed. The whispers flared into rumors, the rumors ignited into wildfire. She let him touch her feet. They say he kissed them, like a priest at the altar. He's not just a priest, says he's the Pope. And that was enough to rattle every rusted cross in town. Father Matteo wasted no time. He summoned everyone to the village square. The chapel's doors were flung open not to welcome the faithful, but to stage a trial. From beneath the cracked bell tower, the priest appeared in full regalia, his robes sharp with gold thread and judgment. His voice cracked through the air like a whip. Today, he declared, we confront heresy flesh and bone. Villagers gathered in packs. Men gripped their belts like they might draw swords from them. Women clutched prayer beads that rattled with nervous fingers. Children peeked from behind carts. Marisol stood at the edge of the square, half hidden behind a fruit stall, heart punching inside her chest. She hadn't meant to return, but something deeper than fear had brought her back. Not for Elias, for herself. Then, finally, Elias appeared. He walked with no urgency, no shame. His robes were dusty, his beard swayed with the breeze. He didn't stop until he stood face to face with Father Matteo. I know who you are, the priest sneered. You've infected this town with poison dressed as prophecy. I've offered truth, Elias replied, calm as still water. You're free to reject it. You disgraced the sacred, Matteo shouted, his voice rising with fury. You knelt before a sinner. You washed her feet like a dog bowing to its master. A collective gasp surged through the square shop, startled, full of unspoken fear. Elias turned to the crowd. His gaze wasn't angry, just exhausted. You call her unclean, he said, voice echoing through the plaza. You bolt your doors to her. You use her name as a warning, but not one of you ever asked what broke her. Silence. It wasn't passive, it was brutal. I once walked among men in silk robes and golden rings, Elias continued. They called themselves heaven's keepers, but they forgot how to bend their knees. They forgot how to listen, so I left. Father Matteo pointed a trembling finger. And where did you go? Elias's eyes flicked briefly to Marisol. To the ones they abandoned. You think you're holy, Matteo spat. You're mad, a danger. Elias nodded. Then let the mad speak once before you burn him. No one moved. Not the priest, not the crowd. So Elias stepped onto the first stone of the chapel. He turned to face them all. This church was not built by saints, he said, voice low but unmistakable. It was built by beggars, by widows, by men who stumbled and women who were never given paths. You speak of power, he lifted his hand, displaying the golden ring. Then let this be power, just once, to remind you. He looked at them, not above them. Holiness isn't stitched in silk. It lives in the hands that heal, in words that do not punish, in feet that keep walking after the world has tried to stop them. A woman in the crowd began to sob, quietly. No one reached out to her. You cry out the name of the Lord, Elias said, but what kind of God casts out a woman for surviving? What shepherd throws away a lamb because it limps? His voice cracked not loud, but deep. You protect your altar from the impure, but the altar was built for the impure. No cheers, no amen, just silence thick and unbearable. Marisol felt her throat burn. She didn't know when the tears began, only that they wouldn't stop. Elias stepped down, nodded once to the priest, and walked away. No one stopped him. No one dared. And in that breathless square so used to casting stones, something more dangerous than blasphemy took root. Doubt. No one spoke for hours. Afterward, Elias returned to the hills in silence. Marisol followed not from fear, but from something else, something that told her this silence was sacred. They reached the grove where the stream wrapped like a ribbon through scattered rocks. The sun dipped low. The world hushed. Elias sat beneath the mesquite and removed his sandals, wincing. Marisol stepped forward, nothing in her hands but a question. "They'll come for you." "I know," he said. "Why aren't you running?" "Because truth doesn't run, lies do." She sat beside him, smoothing her skirt under her knees. For a while they didn't look at each other. Then she said quietly, "I saw your hand today, the way you raised that ring." He said nothing. "I've seen it before," she went on. "Years ago, my grandfather took me to a cathedral in the city. I saw a bishop raise his hand like that, and everyone knelt, even my grandfather." Elias stared at the horizon. "And your voice?" she whispered. "It changed. It wasn't loud, but it filled everything." He smiled faintly. "They trained us for that." "Who did?" she asked. He finally turned to her. From his cloak, he pulled a linen-wrapped bundle. Slowly, he unwrapped it. Inside was an old letter. The parchment had yellowed, its edges curled like fire had kissed it. The seal was intact, deep red wax stamped with the symbol of cross keys and a triple crown. Marisol's breath caught. She reached for it. He pulled it back, gently. "Read it with your ears," Elias said. "Not your hands." Then, without unsealing it, he spoke the words from memory. "To His Holiness Elias of Arishabi, decree of the Sacred Order for the Doctrine of Faith, you are hereby stripped of all titles, honors, and protections. Your acts in Florence, Naples, and elsewhere sheltering the condemned, embracing the exiled, and performing rites for the unworthy are deemed defiance of the magisterium. You are to vacate the Holy See within 48 hours. No appeal will be heard. Let silence be your final prayer." He lowered the letter, voice still steady, but something in him had shifted. "I kept it," he said, "because it's the only thing Rome ever gave me that I didn't regret." Marisol's pulse thundered. "They exiled you," she whispered, "for mercy." He nodded. "They said love was dangerous, that compassion leads to rebellion. That evening, beneath a sky bursting with stars, Marisol sat across from Elias while he stirred a modest pot of beans. The fire flickered in his eyes, though his hands moved slowly, his strength waning, though he never named it. She watched him for a while, then broke the silence. "I lied to you." He didn't look up. "I told you my husband fell, that it was an accident." He stirred the pot once, then paused. "You said you twisted away." "They said washing the feet of the sick made me unfit to lead," Elias whispered, eyes shimmering, but he didn't blink. "But if leadership demands blindness, I'd rather be forgotten." He rewrapped the letter slowly, carefully, and tucked it back into the folds of his cloak. Marisol reached forward, her hand settling gently on his. "You're not forgotten," she said. He looked at her not as a redeemer, not as a priest, not as a figurehead, but as a man, and in that shared gaze, something passed between them, not romance, not yet, but recognition. The kind that only happens when two broken souls finally stop hiding their fractures. She leaned against the tree beside him, the twilight sky above deepening into indigo. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. "Rome?" He thought for a long while, long enough for the wind to shift. "I miss what it could have been," he finally said, then quieter still, "but I found something holier here." She turned, confused. "What?" "You," he said. Since the sermon, the village had grown strangely quiet. Not because they'd accepted Elias, not because they'd forgiven Marisol, but because silence often follows fear. Fear of truth, fear of what it reflects, fear of seeing yourself in someone you were raised to hate. The villagers no longer spat at her or called names when she walked past, but they didn't speak to her either. They turned their faces quickly, as if afraid that meeting her eyes would ignite something in them they couldn't unsee. At night, the hills became her refuge. Under open stars, untouched by judgment, she found stillness. The steady rhythm of Elias's breath beside the campfire gave her an uneasy peace. Uneasy because she knew peace always demanded a price. That evening, beneath a sky bursting with stars, Marisol sat across from Elias while he stirred a modest pot of beans. The fire flickered in his eyes, though his hands moved slowly, his strength waning, though he never named it. She watched him for a while, then broke the silence. "I lied to you." He didn't look up. "I told you my husband fell, that it was an accident." He stirred the pot once, then paused. "You said you twisted away." "I did," she replied, "but that wasn't the end." Her voice trembled. "He didn't die from the fall." Elias finally looked at her. "He broke his leg," she whispered, cried like a child, begged me to help him, said if I saved him, he'd forgive me. He'd forget everything. We'd go back to what we were before. She clenched her fists. Back to the cellar, back to the silence. Her gaze dropped to the ground. I walked away. I heard the coyotes hours later. I never turned back. The silence that followed pressed hard on her chest. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "You want to know the worst part?" she asked, voice cracking. I felt relieved. Elias didn't flinch, didn't offer pious words. He simply sat, present, listening. "You said once," she continued, "that holiness lives in the broken. But what if what's inside me can't be healed? What if it was never clean to begin with?" Elias reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, worn wooden crucifix. It wasn't ornate, no gold, no polish, just raw wood, smoothed by time. He handed it to her. "This," he said, "was carved by a prisoner, a man who murdered someone in front of a crowd. No trial, no defense." Marisol traced the edges. The figure of Christ was nearly worn away. "He carved it with a spoon," Elias added, "because even he believes something broken can still become something sacred." Her fingers trembled over the splintered wood. The tears came fast now. "I'm not that man," she whispered. "No," Elias said. "You're the woman who lived. That's even harder." He reached forward and gently placed her hand over the cross. "Your sin," he said, "was surviving, and I will never call that unholy." She couldn't respond. She couldn't breathe. She could only cry, the kind of crying that cracks something open, the kind that says, "Finally, finally, the truth is out." He stayed with her, close but silent, until the fire faded to ember. She didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer it. What passed between them wasn't absolution, it was understanding. Then came the smoke. Thin, grey, and rising from the rooftops like a question no one wanted to answer. Then came the noisy, first faint, then angry. Boots thudding, fists pounding, voices calling names they had no right to speak. Marisol stood in the hills, heart racing. The glow of the fire danced across Elias's face, but he didn't move. "They've started something," she whispered. He nodded. "Yes." She waited for him to run, to hide, but he looked to the sky, calm, as if listening for something divine. "Elias," she said urgently, "you have to go. They'll hurt you." "They're not coming for me," he replied, voice even. "They're coming for the idea of me." She stared at him, unsure what he meant. He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and kind. "Let them come. The truth has survived worse." They didn't have to wait long. A boy, no more than 12, came running up the hill barefoot, face streaked with ash, chest heaving. "They say you cursed the town," he cried. "They say you're a devil in robes." His voice cracked. "They're burning the chapel. Yours. They say you and her did it." Marisol's mouth fell open. "They're marching up here now," the boy added, "with ropes." Elias didn't blink. He turned to Marisol and said, softly, "You don't have to stay. I'm not leaving you." He smiled. Then we faced them together. By the time the mob reached the ridge, torches in hand, the sun was little more than a fading memory. The final light of day clung to the sky like an old prayer trying not to be forgotten. Father Matteo led the charge, his robes drenched in sweat, his voice raw from screaming. Behind him came the villagers' men with axes, women with stones, children with eyes already emptied by fear. "There they are," someone yelled, "the heretic and the whore. Bind him." Marisol stepped forward, arms wide. "He didn't do anything." A rock slammed into the dirt inches from her feet. "Move," barked a man. She didn't. Then from the edge of the moba, voice rang out, high, young, and trembling. "Stop." Heads turned. It was the boy, the same boy who had warned them. He stood alone, arms shaking. He gave my mama food when no one else would, he shouted. When she was dying, he held her hand, said her name like it mattered. Someone tried to hush him, but he yelled louder. He washed her feet too, because she hadn't felt clean in years. A murmur broke through the crowd. Then another voice, an old man, limping forward. He prayed with me when my son was drinking himself to death, the man said. Didn't call him wicked. Just said, let him come home when he's ready. No priest ever said that to me. And then a woman stepped forward, and another, each one with a story, a moment, a kindness. The torches didn't go out, but they lowered. Father? Someone asked. Matteo's face turned pale. Elias stood calmly, not looking at his accusers but at the ones he'd helped without asking anything in return. I'm not here to be your pope, he said. I'm here to remind you what one should have been. No one responded, no one moved. Finally, Father Matteo turned, walked away, his robe dragged in the dust. One by one, the villagers followed. The fire in the chapel raged through the night, but no one cheered. And on the hill, Marisol dropped to her knees, shaking. Elias knelt beside her, wrapping her in his arms, not like a prophet, not like a savior, but like someone who had burned, too. The chapel fire burned until sunrise. By morning, only the stone steps remained. The altar had crumbled to ash. The cross that once hung proudly now lay shattered beneath charred beams. The air in San Miro reeked of smoke and something heavier, guilt. No one rebuilt. No one spoke of it again. They lived around the ruins like ignoring them might erase the past. But in the hills under the twisted mesquite tree, a different sanctuary bloomed. Elias hadn't risen from his bedroll that morning, or the next. His breath grew shallow, his voice faded. He no longer spoke of Rome or exile or sin. He only asked for water and sunlight and Marisol. She barely left his side. She wrapped his feet in lavender-soaked cloth, changed the linens, held his hand. Each night, she listened to the rasp in his chest, begging it not to be the last. On the fourth day, she woke to find him smiling. I had a dream, he whispered. She leaned in. Tell me. I saw a corridor, long and lit with candles, no thrones, no gold, just people, the ones I couldn't save, waiting, smiling. She wiped the sweat from his brow. They were never lost, she whispered. They were waiting for you. He turned his head slowly. You were there too, he said. You weren't waiting, Elias whispered. You were washing someone else's feet. Marisol's throat clenched. I don't deserve that, she murmured. Yes, he said. You do. You became what they feared you would, someone who heals. His hand trembled as he reached into the folds of his robe. She helped him gently, guiding his fingers to the object hidden within, the ring, the one carved with the seal of crossed keys and faded gold. It no longer fit any finger, but he pressed it into her palm. It's not a crown, Elias said. It's a key, not to heaven, to the heart. She held it, stunned. I'm not holy, she whispered. You're human, he replied. That's holier. She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. Don't go yet. I have to, he said, soft as fading wind, but I'll leave the door open. His breath began to slow. She leaned close, her hands cradling his face. Elias. He blinked once, then again, then stopped. No thunder cracked the sky. No angels descended. No bells rang. Elias of Arishiathi, exiled shepherd, the wandering prophet of the hills, was gone. Marisol didn't cry, not at first. She sat beside him in silence, just being. She took the small wooden crucifix he always carried and placed it gently over his heart. Then she folded his hands across his chest, kissed his forehead, and whispered the final rite in a voice only he would have recognized. That night, the wind shifted. A soft breeze moved through the hills, as if carrying his breath upward one last time. Months passed. The burned chapel in San Miro was never cleared. Ashes clung to the stones, weeds crept across the ruins. Children avoided it, afraid the silence still spoke. But further up the hillside, something else began to grow. Not a monument, not a shrine. Something quieter, truer. With nothing but her bare hands and quiet determination, Marisol worked alone. She gathered stones from the dry streambed. She packed walls from sun-baked clay and driftwood. The roof was patched with worn canvas and stitched hides. There were no pews, just straw mats. It smelled of sage, dust, and smoke. But it was hers. At first, they called it her shack, then her sanctuary. Eventually, they called it the little church. She never placed a cross above the entrance. Instead, she tied one thing to the door framer, single relic from the man who changed her life. Elias's ring, fastened with a strip of his old robe. It caught the morning light like a silent bell. She didn't preach, didn't beg anyone to believe, she just left the door open. And, slowly, they came. The widow who lost her sons to the mines, the young man shunned for loving another, the woman everyone whispered about barren, cursed, and children too small to understand, carrying questions too big for their homes. They came not to be saved, but because no one turned them away. Some sat quietly, some wept, some sang, some just breathed. And sometimes, when no one watched, Marisol washed their feet. Not to cleanse them, but to let them feel seen. One evening, a traveller arrived, a stranger in a tattered cloak, with weathered skin and blistered hands. He asked for shelter. She gave it without question. Before he left, he reached up and touched the ring above the door. "I heard a story once," he said, "about a man who gave away his crown to give someone back their name." Marisol smiled softly. "It wasn't a crown," she replied, "it was a mirror." That night, she sat outside beneath the same twisted mesquite tree where she had once believed herself cursed. Above her, the stars blinked like old gods keeping watch. She leaned against the roots and closed her eyes. She remembered Elias's voice, deep and gentle, like prayers whispered to a God who doesn't interrupt. She remembered his hand show they never recoiled. And the final thing he'd ever said, "You became what they feared you might." She smiled toward the heavens. Because now, finally, she understood. They feared that if she ever healed, she might teach others to do the same. And she did. Not with sermons, not with miracles, but with water, with hands, and with a door that was never locked. Sometimes the holiest people are the ones no one notices. They don't wear robes. They don't stand behind pulpits. They just show up quietly when everyone else walks away. This wasn't just a story about a forgotten pope or a rejected woman. It was about what happens when grace chooses the outcast, when dignity is restored not through power but through presence, and when the most sacred act is staying. Now we ask you, have you ever been truly seen by someone when you felt invisible? Or have you ever been the one to see someone the world tried to forget? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow or subscribe the channel for more stories of strength, redemption, and the quiet holiness of being human.